Good afternoon and welcome to the Section 223 Committee hearing for the revised draft budget 2019-2020. East Gippsland Shire Council will live stream, record and publish this Section 223 hearing via webcasting to enhance its accessibility to the broader East Gippsland community. The recording will also be archived and available for viewing by the public or used for publicity or information purposes. At the appropriate times during the hearing, any submitter that addresses the committee will have their image, comments and submission recorded. Please ensure that mobile phones and other electronic devices are turned off or in silent mode for the duration of the meeting. Committee members are reminded that the purpose of this hearing is for them to hear submissions and seek clarification from officers or submitters where required. Declaration of conflicts of interest.
None have been received, Madam Mayor.
I will now ask Ms Liz Collins, the Executive Manager for Finance, to give a brief background to the purpose of this hearing.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The revised draft budget 1920 was exhibited for public review following the 7th of May Council meeting. Submissions closed on Friday, 7th of June, last Friday, and written submissions are now presented for the committee's consideration. This hearing represents the only opportunity for submitters to address councillors on the issues, because having participated in the Section 223 hearing, they will not be eligible to speak to the item at the council meeting on the 25th of June, when the final decision on the budget will be made by council. I just also wanted to note at this point that following the reading of many of the submissions, just to note for the general public that any ratepayer who is experiencing financial hardship can use council's financial hardship provisions. We have a policy and a process that any ratepayer who is in financial hardship can apply to council to have their situation reviewed, and in terms of assistance that might be able to be provided for the payment of rates and the review of interest charges. In terms of consideration of the submissions, there is a memorandum today which all councillors have summarising the items raised. There was 44 submissions when the documents were sent to councillors. There has since been a further 2 submissions that have just come into our system, and they've been tabled and a copy provided to every councillor of those other 2 submissions. So a total of 46 submissions have been received. The memo sets out the submissions in summary. There is a summary table attached also, but there is officer commentary provided for all of the 44 submissions that we'd received on Friday, and the other 2 can be discussed also as well as part of the process. Those documents, councillors have a copy of all of those documents, as well as a copy of every submission in full. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Ms Collins. We have 9 submitters who have advised they wish to address the committee on their submission. So I'll now invite each submitter in turn to address the committee in respect of their submissions, and in doing so advise that they have no more than 5 minutes to give their presentation.
Where do you get the 5 minutes from? It's a 223 hearing. There's no limit to the time limit.
I have
Otherwise we'll have to abandon the whole show and start again. The Local Government Act on Section 223 gives the person the right to make a submission. It doesn't say a 5-minute submission. It doesn't say a short submission. It says a submission. And you have no right to come to 5 minutes.
As the chair, I have asked 5 minutes, but I will seek clarification from Mr CEO or our Director of Governance, Ms Bennett. Can you please refrain from calling out? I've asked for clarification. Can you please refrain from calling out?
My name is David Eagleson. Madam Mayor, I would take the contrary view to Mr Eagleson in that the Act is silent, in which case you have as much right to determine an interpretation of the Act as Mr Eagleson. And under our provisions, as the chair of the meeting, you have the authority to set a time frame if you choose.
Thank you, Ms Bennett. So, as I have previously stated, presentations will go no more than 5 minutes, and I'll now ask Mr Chris Nixon, who's the Farmers Voice Orbost Branch VFF, to come forward and make his submission, if he is. No? Okay, we can hold off till the end to see if he arrives. RM Treasure, if you would like to come and present to the committee.
Is that the correct distance to be away? Can I be heard correctly? Okay. Right. I appreciate being able to address the Council in regards to the Council's working, future plans and budgets. I trust to have your full and undivided attention, as I am not an eloquent speaker. It is important that you concentrate on my principles rather than the detail. In my submission, I did tick, on the online submission, I did tick both boxes to speak to the 1721 and the 1920, whatever categories they're called. Right, Council needs to cut your garment to your cloth. Translate this as correctly understand ratepayers' situation of drought, the economic flow-on of farmers' lack of spending to the business sector, decreased interest rates for the self-funded to live on, etc. So, Council, decrease markedly or freeze the rates to all, and also cut by 50% the rates to farmers. It appears there is a profit or a surplus in the budget, so a reduction can be afforded. For example, this agricultural seasonal downturn has an impact on cattle breeding herds for a minimum of 5 years and will continue to impact for possibly another 5 years before livestock numbers can return to capacity. So the economics are tenuous for a long time for a lot of ratepayers. It is not possible from the draft information to understand where dollars should be excised, as detail is missing. I do think that many projects outside state statutory obligations need to be axed. User pays should be arranged only, however, if management improves markedly so costs are enormously decreased. Please note that. The livestock exchange seems to be a user pays. Profit revenue should not go into general revenue. This will show how much the exchange makes in profit. Management needs to devise a way to decrease user pays costs. Extensive money as depreciation physically or needs to be put aside for future responsible works in a livestock exchange interest-bearing account. With the rate system, strenuous consideration and a move to change to house and curtilage for rating is paramount. It gives greater equity of rate costs. The housing sector is increasing in high numbers. Basic use of a calculator or pen and paper, and start from the position, how much money is there from the ratepayers, and with the rate freeze or 50% reduction and the house and curtilage system, then decide what can be afforded. This needs to be the culture and shift in attitude of staff and whoever present items to council. The assumption rates need to continuously increase is not my mode of thinking. Shift to council will do better delivery and financial management, be more efficient on less, and be more responsible with the taxpayers' rate money. Importantly, council cannot be all things to all people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Treasure. Are there any questions from the councillors?
Liz, if I may, there seems to be a perception out in the community that because we have a surplus in our bank that it's brought on from over charging in rates, and I'm curious as to whether there can be an explanation to the public as to how this surplus has come about and what it's put aside for. It's employee entitlements and it's been revenue that's been gathered over the years, but I'm wondering whether you could enlighten us a bit further on those sorts of areas as to why there is a surplus in council, in the council budget.
Thank you, Councillor Pels. And I think in the summary in the memo, I do refer to this in terms of ensuring that people read the financial statements in total, because it does tell a different story. In our operating income, which produces the surplus, it includes a significant component for capital grant income, which has to be reported in the operating accounts. So council has, a 35+ million capital program, and that's funded partly from those government grants, from council cash and other contributions. So in terms of what's in our surplus, there is significant funding towards the capital works program. Therefore, we need to make a surplus, as you referred to. When we're talking about the cash and we look at the cash flow statement, part of that is about ensuring we have cash readily available to meet our short-term commitments in terms of employee costs and other payables at year end as well. So the statements do explain that if you read through that and the notes within the budget.
Thank you. Thanks, Ms Treasure. I will now... this is not... Okay. No. Thank you. I'll now ask Ms Janice Coates to come and speak.
First of all, I'd like to apologise for the brevity of my written submission, which was a one-liner saying that I want to mention my objection to what our rate increases are, and that I would submit a verbal submission on the day. Now, this is due to the fact that being very busy trying to keep the farm going under drought conditions, I had limited time to get all this together. However, what I have done, I've prepared a summary of the rate situation for our particular farm enterprise to support the evidence that the rate increases have been, I believe, unfair for a number of years. So what I'll do, I haven't got enough, I've only got 10 of these to go around, so some might have to share one between two. But I haven't actually put the actual rate amounts on this submission, but what I have done is shown for a number of years what the rate increase in dollar terms was for the 4 different titles that comprise our farm enterprise that we run. And I'll explain that for property 2, I don't know if everyone's got a copy of that yet to look at, but in 2018, property 2 and 3 actually had a decrease in the rates, and that was due to me putting in an objection to the valuation that occurred, the revaluation that occurred at that time, which showed a significant decrease for those 2 properties. I haven't added up the totals of all that. You can work that out for yourselves. You'll see the municipal charge has been set out in that right-hand column, and it's a bit all over the place. I think some of the reasons for the big increase there was that waste management was included in that charge in 2015 at the time, but you would know more about that than myself and might correct me on that. However, going down to the percentage rate increase, which is the second table at the bottom, which really paints the picture of what I'm talking about today, that over a number of years, that rate increase from 2012 to 2013 was put at 4%, which I think that year the council had a policy that everything would be a straight 4% increase. Now, the following year, you'll see that the rate increase, there was nothing under 10% increase. It went from between 10 and 12.4% increase. The following year, once again, there was a overall increase for the rates, and in 2016, once again, it was a bit all over the place. 2017, we had a 2% increase. Once again, I think that was due to the council deciding on a blanket rate increase for that year. 2018, as I said, the property 2 and 3 actually had a decrease because of the objection that I put into the revaluation that year. But the one property had an increase of 13.26% on it in that year. Now, when I read in the paper that we have got certain rate increases occurring with the Shire, when I look at my rates when I get them, it doesn't tally at all with what's been put in the paper, and I wonder why this discrepancy occurs. Now, I averaged out all those property rate increases, and then I averaged the averages and got 4.64% increase over that 8-year period. And when I compared that to the rate of inflation for Australia at 1.93%, I wonder why, over all those years, we are seeing more than double, probably 2.25 times more than the rate of inflation for the way our rates go up. So that's my submission. I think something needs to be done about this.
Thanks, Ms Coates. Are there any questions from the councillors? No? Thank you. Yep. Mr John Dolson.
Madam Mayor, I've had a few to say. Maybe I'd rather hear other people and maybe I can pick up some crumbs at the end.
Okay. Mr David Eagleson.
Thank you. First, I'd like to start by saying I strongly disagree with what you're ruling on the 5 minutes. I think it's completely out of order. Section 223 hearings should not be confused with the local law that covers council meetings. This is not a council meeting, it's a hearing of submissions. And to cut it to 5 minutes is totally out of order, and I'm most disappointed. Our lovely council plan talks of a vision for East Gippsland. We will be accessible and active in engaging with our community. We will invite, listen and seek to understand the views of others, proactively share information about council's plans, project service and that. Now, to cut in a submission to 5 minutes on a huge document like the budget is absolutely in contrast to your planned vision for East Gippsland. I see this as not a good budget at all. Despite 2 pages of rhetoric in the lead up to it saying how wonderful it is, but the council plan talks of wonderful things like, and has lovely statements like building strong, vibrant communities, enriching lifestyle, dynamic and thriving economies. In the council plan, I don't see any mention of the word ratepayer. I see the council plan is a plan to screw as much out of ratepayers as they possibly can over the next 3 years. It lists a 2.5% rise planned every year. Now, when you add that to the increasing number of properties being rated, it actually works out to be an 8.6% increase in revenue for the Shire. And that's until the end of the plan. And a very cosy little setup for selected tenderers and staff. It's the time the councillors started to do what they're elected to do, and that's represent the ratepayers. Represent the ratepayers, not the Shire and the staff, it's represent the ratepayers. And I support the suggestion that's going around that there should be no rises in the rates for this year and a 50% cut for farmers' rates. This is not any subsidy or handout, but it is a start to redressing the gross overcharging that has been done in the past. If the Shire was run with an interest of the ratepayers, this could be done without, or could be a much greater reduction. This free suggestion and cut can easily be achieved by cutting back on some of the extravagances, nor do we need the large surplus. These cuts could be easily achieved. For many years I was a commercial builder with many years experience in that. So I had a quick look at some of the figures in the council planned expenses. $50,000 to design a toilet block at Port of Bairnsdale. $20,000 to design a Malaku to Foreshore toilet block. $30,000 to design an amenities block. That's $100,000 just there. Surely to goodness we can go to the plan drawer and pull out some plans of a toilet block. It's $100,000 saved straight away. You have a building surveyor on staff, surely he'd be capable of finding a plan of a toilet block. Surely we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we want to drive somewhere. Now come back to going to actually build the toilet block. $240,000 for one, $250,000. You've got to be joking. Another item like relocate the toilet block at Eagle Point, $550,000. What's going on? You could demolish the existing toilet and build 2 McMansions for $550,000. It's a joke. And we're supposed to sit back and think it's wonderful and we only get 5 minutes to comment on it. I get further on to the economic development, service, and what they claim they're going to do. That they're going to service the economic development and assist the organisation to facilitate an environment that is conducive to a sustainable and growing local business sector and provide opportunities for local residents to improve their skills and access employment. And we're going to give them $1.496 million to do that. Surely, to goodness, we're setting up in opposition to TAFE or something. It's not this council's responsibility to train people in jobs. We don't have the skills, we don't have the time, and it's certainly not ratepayers' responsibility to do this. We pay taxes to the federal and state governments to do that, not the council.
Can you please conclude, Mr Eagleson?
I've got a little bit to go.
Can you just please
And
wrap
now
it up?
we go on to the next one. All that is going to do is going to drive businesses out of the area. Who would come to an area where they're going to be rated out of the place through high taxes because they're going to be paying double taxes all the time? Now, legal expenses. I see there's an item of 400,000. Surely we're not planning to persecute another councillor. A lot of the money that went into the last legal bill was just persecuting one councillor.
Mr Eagleson, can you please conclude your
Surely we don't have to keep
presentation?
up writing half the new local newspaper with all the propaganda releases. And it could go on, but you obviously won't give me a chance, but I could list about a dozen more things that it's just ridiculous that you even consider this continual rate rise.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the councillors? We have a Michael who has requested to speak. No. Miss Lynette Treasure, can you please come and present?
Can you switch on that thing for me? Thank you. At the outset of my presentation, I'd like to acknowledge that the CEO, Mr Basford, is new to the position and he has inherited the culture and processes which are now under close scrutiny. He did not create the processes which have developed over the past 15 years, but clearly he will be a key player if genuine change is to take place. East Gippsland Shire is moving towards a crisis point. I don't say that lightly. For a number of years, public concern has been growing over escalating rates, closed processes and extravagant spending. East Gippsland is one of the poorest areas in the state, with the median household income of $37,000, being $10,000 less than the Australian median. And yet this shire is among those with the highest rates, on a par with some of Melbourne's wealthiest areas. Over the past 10 years, compounding rates have risen far beyond rises in wages and prices, with farm rates in East Gippsland among the highest in the state. What has developed cannot be sustained. The culture that has developed serves not the ratepayers who fund it, but a closed bureaucratic system that blocks genuine interaction with the public. And I think we've seen that today. If we can't listen for a few more minutes to a very, very serious issue that underlines everything we do, we're in a very sad state. There are regular closed briefing sessions where councillors are expected to reach consensus. Notices of motion put up by councillors to bring matters into the public are few, as they are frowned upon as being bad team playing, like broadsiding your colleagues. Quote, councillors are kept busy with social attendances, so they perceive when they come in to be councillors that their role is a sort of vice-regal one, culminating every month in a primary school-like show and tell display for the public. The real work of councillors has been largely abdicated through increased powers of delegation and a lack of questioning of information given in the briefing sessions. There is a very clear need for all councillors to be familiar with the Local Government Act and other relevant acts, even their own local laws and meeting procedures. Briefing sessions need to be open to the public for broader input to issues, and councillors need to thoroughly track budget trajectories. Two of the most important roles of a councillor are the selection of a CEO and the approval and working of the budget. Not blindly, but after careful consideration and questioning. What has grown up over the past 15 years is a culture of compliance to the administration. After the hype of elections for councillors to represent us, the candidates cross the drawbridge to corporate fortress and almost immediately swap allegiance. Continually they are told they must be team players, but they are no longer leaders of the ratepayer team. They have become the corporate team, isolated from their constituents. Last election, due to dissatisfaction with the Shire, a record 39 candidates stood, with the two most touted issues being the need for greater transparency and lower rates. Last year, 3 councillors moved unsuccessfully for a rate freeze and were publicly chastised by the others. But on the other major issue, processes have remained closed and the rate set at the highest allowed by the government. There is a groundswell of opinion that the Shire is living beyond its means, with senior staff on ridiculously high salaries, too much spent on spin and litigation, slack compliance processes with questionable tender processes, ridiculously high capital works projects needing a more common sense approach, waste on interstate trips with councillors taking along staff minders to steer their thinking. Serious questions have been circulating throughout this Shire now for years. To name just a few: the Raymond Island Ferry, Bastion Point Works, the Waste Management Facility, the Tara Landing Estate, Matheson's Road subdivision, and the expenditure at Benamba in terms of lease to benefit a mining company. There is a need for overall independent review of the operations, programs, staff numbers and improved compliance protocols of the East Gippsland Shire. This should include significant reduction in staff numbers, particularly in the area of governance and public relations. The local paper should write its own articles to include Shire activities. People are not duped by continuous hype, and they are aware when speeches and quotes have been concocted by the PR department. It would improve the council's credibility if councillors opened and responded their own mail and if they spoke with their own voices on varied issues. There is a need to rationalise workspace. The councillors used to have these council chambers in between ordinary meetings if they had other smaller meetings. We have now downstairs a great big room underutilised as per underutilisation customer services in Service Street, very much underutilised, but it's costly to maintain. Why not sell it and put the money to better use? Overall, the message is for more sensible, responsible and frugal operations, a reduction in staff and fleet vehicles. The rates this year should be frozen and farmers' rates cut by 50%. This could easily be done from the surplus of $13.8 million, as well as the profits from out of the farmers at the livestock exchange, which is probably in the order of something like $1 million. I wish our new CEO well. He will need integrity, conviction and courage for the massive job ahead. East Gippsland has been teetering for a number of years on the brink of a major inquiry. I've heard that now about 6 times from different groups of people, and it'll come to a head, I assure you. The groundswell is rising.
Please conclude, Ms Treasure.
The groundswell is rising. The response to this budget is its beginning. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the councillors? No. Thank you.
Have you read the budget? Have you studied it?
Thank you, Ms Treasure.
Thank you.
Mr Ken White.
Afternoon all. I just wanted to make a brief submission to the in regards to the upcoming budget. For what it's worth, a few observations. So whilst East Gippsland Shire are capping rates at the rate increase at the mandatory rate cap, the timing for the implementation of rates valuation increases couldn't be much worse given the state of play with drought and reduced stock numbers for many East Gippsland farmers. The release of the budget, probably in its first instance, showed the lack of respect, empathy and how in touch East Gippsland Shire is with its ratepayers and in particular its farming community. I've mapped out the increase in rate revenue and increase in total wages and remuneration to staff over the past 15 years, and it tells a compelling story. Since 2004, in general, rate revenue has increased approximately 170+%, from 21 million in 2004 to 58 million last year. Wages have increased during this period by some 270+%, from 7.5 million in 2004 to 28 million last year. What does this tell the average ratepayer? That most of the rate revenue, 62% of the increase in rate revenue over that period, doesn't actually hit the ground in capital works and maintenance. Much of it is lost in wages in the offices. I realise I'm generalising here in that some of those wages would be frontline wages, and there are some wages that are funded via capital grants, not rate revenue. However, these are compelling numbers, and if the Shire really wanted to be transparent with its biggest stakeholders, it should open up and tell exactly where the money goes, not just give us a pretty little pie chart on our rates bill. Further on the debate of rates, I personally have no objection to paying rates, bearing in mind the terrible timing for the increase as stated above. Just like paying taxes. However, my biggest gripe is the lack of accountability on where rate revenue is spent. As stated above, much of it has been spent on wages, which I would be fascinated to see how the Shire can justify this. Much of the rest of it is spent on capital works and maintenance. The Shire has had some epic fails on accountability and maintenance and capital works in recent years. I believe, and I'm happy to be proven incorrect, that under previous leadership the Shire has had complete disdain for accountability and anyone, including myself, who wanted to bring them to account. A few examples of this include A. Having an exclusive supply agreement with a roads maintenance contractor for the provision of road materials without a contract and without a tender for over 6 years. B. Approving a budget and project for the redevelopment of Pike Street offices for the Shire without carrying out an asbestos audit, which resulted in a project overrun in the tune of $600,000. On this particular job, to cover tracks, the Shire simply changed their council-approved budget figure in its tracking of its capital works program, so when it reaches the end of the project, it magically meets budget. C. Repairing the Raymond Island Ferry on a council-approved budget figure of around $1.2 million, only for this project to run over to $2.1 million approximately in the space of 4 months. And that particular job brought about it took an independent accounting firm to look into that one and tell our Shire that we'd done the wrong thing. And if you read a couple of lines out of this, a summary of the findings, this is a Crowe-Horwath report into that particular job. Summary of the findings, overall we found that the procurement undertaken was not compliant with the Council's funding, legislative or policy obligations. Secondly, the procurement and financial controls in place were not adhered to, and there was insufficient oversight and account of expenditure related to those works. So we have systems and controls in place, we just don't adhere to them at all. D. Street beautification projects for the Bensdale CBD that were snuck through councillors with little oversight and that will only cause greater retail stress than many businesses are already suffering. I see a shop across the road from my office with a closing sign on it just in the last week. Apparently stakeholders were consulted on this. I'm in the CBD, and apart from a 2-page survey where I made it clear car parks were already at a premium, we rely on some consultant's report from Melbourne to tell us that we have adequate long-term car parks in Delmahoy Street, so we can get rid of a few dozen in and around Safeway of all places. So we'll see some more retailers closing in the next 12 to 24 months. This is not just a result of Shire's actions. I get there's other issues, but the Shire's actions are not really helping. I've got plenty more where that came from. Basically, within the Shire, there's a culture that you guys know best, and we all know nothing. Consultation's only done so you can tick a box and say that it's done. I don't believe it's genuine. The Shire has an audit committee, so the public are told, and the public would think that by its very name, it's more than just a tick and flick oversight capacity. That's not the case. This committee has no capacity to dig into the real issues and recommend improvements. They rely on panel-beaten information fed to them by staff who will work to protect their own positions within the organisation. This business does not like or want transparency when its biggest stakeholders are demanding it. If the Shire was genuinely keen on transparency and accountability, it would give the Audit Committee more power, get properly qualified people on it and pay them for their time to give the public confidence in the service. The cut and thrust of my argument is that if this Shire can demonstrate it's delivering genuine value for rates instead of debacles like the ones I've just talked about, then the arguments about rate revenue itself do not have anywhere near as much clout. Waste money, which is what's happened in recent years, and it's no surprise you're facing the opposition that you have on these issues. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. White. Are there any questions from the councillors? Councillor Peltz.
Yeah, just in regards to the point that Mr. White brought up about the wage increase over since 2004. And I'm curious as to how that's come about only, and I know that Liz probably wouldn't know this, but we do have base guidelines that if someone's taking up the role and they're being paid for a job, it is within a guideline, and council has to pay within that guideline for it to be fulfilled. And I'm just curious for the public to understand how those increases come about. If you can, please, Liz or Marianne or someone.
Thank you, Councillor Pels. During the time period referred to by Mr White, I think it was 11/12, and it is listed in the memo response, Council made a decision to bring the Parks and Gardens services back in-house. Previously that had been provided by contract, and so that was significant increase in terms of employee costs related to bringing that service back in-house. And there was obviously a reduction in contractor costs. But in reading the information in the financial statements, you probably really need to read all of the information, because at the same time we're also undertaking the Tambo Bluff private scheme works. So there was a obviously increased income and expenditure through that period for that project as well. Not necessarily employee costs, but in terms of the offsetting, yes, there was a plus for employee costs, but there was a reduction in external materials and contractor costs, significant in that year.
Thanks, Councillor Peltz. Any other questions? Mr Bruce Hurley, Lakes Entrance Action and Development Association.
Lauren.
Okay.
So I'm the treasurer.
Right. Please take a seat, Lauren.
Thank you. So I'm Lauren, the treasurer for Leader. So the 2019-20 draft budget seems to indicate that funds promised for Lakes Entrance for use by 2019 for improvements to the foreshore and esplanade will now not be available until much later, the majority in 22-23. So it's important to put the situation of Lakes Entrance into perspective. We have 25 retail sites in town which are now closed. The place looks half deserted, with broken footpaths in the CBD, buildings that have been vacant for years, and key sites such as the Slipway and Bullock Island remaining an eyesore. There appears to be little incentive for investors to contribute to the town in its current state. In short, the situation needs to be addressed promptly. Lakes is hurting and we need the council's help. After the most successful town meeting to date, with over 320 people in attendance and over 100 surveys completed, the town priorities for Lakes have cemented what we already knew. Bullock Island, the foreshore and esplanade, along with the Lakes Entrance walks, are the most notable items on the townspeople's agenda. Leader and the community welcome the allocation of funds for the Jimmy's Point Lookout, and we are happy to do our part in bringing life back into the town, but we also need the East Gippsland Shire to do their part too. Back on March 8th, Leader met with the federal member for Lakes Entrance, Darren Chester, and the East Gippsland Shire. At this time, we all agreed that Lakes Entrance needed an overarching plan along with a vision and marketing plan to attract investors into the town. After reviewing the draft budget, we note that no funds have been allocated to develop these plans. Therefore, we do request an allocation to be made for development of these plans in the 2019-20 budget. Back in 2016, previous council and management told us it's now Lakes Entrance turn. However, we're only just beginning to see its progress. An allocation of funds towards these plans would be a win for the Shire, as it shows the people of Lakes Entrance that it really is our turn. It goes hand in hand with the funds that have been allocated to Streetscape in 21-22. Leader also requests a budget commitment of $100,000 in 2019-20 and requests that extra funding be sought from state and federal government for improvement to the 4 Lakes Entrance walks. Leader has been in talks with the Shire for over a year regarding the walks, and has also been promised an audit of the walks to address maintenance of the tracks, along with improvements such as directional signage. However, despite documented commitment, there has been no budget allocation made for these important and significant walks. Bullock Island. So Bullock Island has been on the agenda for over 30 years. We know it's not yet been finalised. However, our understanding is that East Gippsland Shire will become responsible apart from the seawalls. The Bullock Island Master Plan was adopted by the Council back in 2015, and our concern is that there's no budget allocation for development of Bullock Island, despite aspects of its development being low cost and a high priority with immediate benefits for residents and tourists. The budget document is a planning document, so there's no reason why allocations can't be made, with provisions in there that are perhaps subject to the finalisation of management arrangements. These are indicative figures, but Leader requests a budget allocation of 1.53 million, being made up as follows. 30,000 in 2019-20 to update the master plan. This could be done in-house or with a consultant, but either way it needs to be done in conjunction with Leader. The rest of the 1.53 million would be as follows. 500,000 for stage 1 in 2020-21, 500,000 for stage 2 in 21-22, and another 500,000 for stage 3 in 22-23. As I said, these are indicative figures, and once we've refined and updated the master plan, we would then have a more accurate idea of staging, budget allocation and grants available. Leader appreciates the now regular meetings with the CEO and the Mayor, and appreciates that money has recently been allocated to Jemmy's Point Lookout and to the works being undertaken along the foreshore. It's an important start to rejuvenating the town, however, much more is needed to address the backlog of much needed infrastructure. So Lakes Entrance is the #1 destination in East Gippsland for holidays, and we need urgent extra allocations in the budget, as I've just outlined, for the development of Lakes Entrance. It's imperative for the survival of Lakes Entrance that these allocations be made to the budget.
Thanks, Ms Barlow. Are there any questions? Councillor Rotino.
A question for the CEO. Could you please clarify Council's position on Bullock Island?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So I think it's been widely discussed that we are not currently the land managers of Bullock Island. Council has been in discussions with DELP for a considerable period of time and are hoping to come up with an arrangement, but it's certainly not a fait accompli in terms of whether we will take over the land management of the island. The Council have made it very clear to myself and other officers that they are concerned about the ongoing legacy issues of some of the infrastructure in there, and you mentioned the seawalls in particular, and that certainly is a concern for us, as it is a legacy issue across the Shire that we are dealing with. So at this point in time, Council doesn't have a formal position on it. It has been discussed on numerous occasions, and it will be the subject of a further report to Council for decision.
Thanks. Councillor Peltz.
If I may, just with regards to expenditure in the Lakes Entrance foreshore, I'm curious as to how much commitment we've actually put into the foreshore streetscape, and also how much Vic Roads has put in as to total expenditure of what's being spent in that town at the moment.
Mr Macpherson, do you wish to answer?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, and Councillor Pels for your question. I can comment on the funding that's allocated in the 4-year capital works program. Unfortunately, at the moment, Councillor Pels, I don't have the Vic Roads or Regional Roads Victoria contribution with me or in front of me and able to supply that figure. Looking at the projected 4-year forecast of the capital works budget, just doing a quick calculation in my head, across the 4 years, there's 1.8 million allocated to Lakes Entrance streetscapes at various stages across multiple years, and then an additional allocation of 770,000 in 22-23 for the Lakes Entrance Foreshore Park.
Any further questions, councillors? Thank you. Mr John Dolson, did you wish to present? You are the last.
that disappoints me deeply. What I've heard today is some very profound observations made by ratepayers, and you talk a lot in your material about listening to the community and understanding what's going on. You've had here several people who have made, I think, first-class observations, and I think the notion of cutting them short is incredible. We are a democracy, and when you close down discussions like that, that of itself is a huge worry to me, huge worry. It says something, and I think you should be more sensitive to that. It also describes that the Shire is incredibly process-driven. You've decided that you must only allow 5 minutes, and that's it. So you're not worried about outcomes, you're worried about process. Now, a couple of people who have spoken here have made some incredible observations that I would have thought councillors should have followed up on and explored further, because in my view, you would have learnt more from that, from a lot of other things, certainly from the stuff that I've been writing. And I regret that I haven't heard from some of these people before I wrote my material, otherwise it would have been quite different. What we have to remember is that I know you are a creature of the state, I know you've got a Local Government Act, but we must consider democracy, we must consider freedom of speech, we must consider the freedom of the individual to be able to have their say, but what you've done today is contrary to that. Now, this has been a very interesting process as far as I'm concerned. I'm a relative outsider, and I've had some incredible feedback that's coming through to me, and I think we're at a tipping point in two ways. First of all, we've got a new CEO, and I think that offers a huge opportunity to do something about the sad situation we're in. But my sense is that if you don't take advantage of the situation with a new CEO and a relatively new mayor, we're going to be in serious trouble. If I were government, I would seriously consider putting this Shire into administration, because I think it's the only way you will sort out a lot of the problems that you've got. Now, that's quite apart from the fact that my own view about this, that the model of shires is flawed. And that of itself is very interesting, because what's happening is the issues that are being raised here are going well beyond this shire. I'm getting feedback from all around the state. Now, that's a bit of a worry. It's also a bit of an opportunity. It's a worry in the sense that you're not alone in some of the problems that you face. They are widespread. And there are a lot of people in other shires who want these problems solved. So they're the shared things. But there are, nevertheless, unique things for this council to face up to. And what a fantastic opportunity is to start from scratch and rethink things, rethink it. Now, one of the things that distresses me is that we're in an incredible economic downturn. And it's my opinion that the press are underplaying how deep the financial crisis is in this country, underplaying it. And I'm privileged to get information that others don't get, telling how sick the economy is, how sick things are in East Gippsland. I noticed today in Painesville, I've heard about the shops closing in Lakes Entrance and Bensdale, but they're closing in Painesville. There is deep, deep pain in this community. And I find it incredible that you can prepare a budget that doesn't have any economic indicators associated with it. How can you prepare a budget that doesn't take into account the economic circumstances in which we live in? What information have you gathered about the capacity of the community to meet, or the community to pay? Nothing. There's no economic indicators. I've rarely seen a budget that doesn't have some assumptions about economic indicators. But however, even if you had some economic indicators when you start, they would be a lot worse now. So I plead with you to worry about our ratepayers and how they're coping. I plead with you to freeze the rates. Mark time. Give us a chance to have a good look at the model. I accept the fact that the rate model is flawed, and I think we should put a lot of options on the table how to deal with it. And I think that would be a very hopeful and constructive thing. But in the meantime, please freeze the rates. Get the farmers a 50% reduction, net of the government subsidy, just to keep things alive. Look, can I say to you, if you don't do something about this, my conviction is, my sense is, that this Shire is going to be in serious, serious difficulty. The groundswell, it's incredible. The emails I'm getting are incredible. And I said to Senator Rotino a few minutes ago, which I would like to repeat now, there's two categories of people that are coming, that are talking with me. There's one that have been aggrieved by individual planning decisions, and those that are concerned about rates and other things. I want you to understand that I will not get involved in individual ratepayer concerns about individual things like planning decisions. That's not in my domain. I am concerned about the health of this community, the health of the Shire, nothing else.
Thank you, Mr Dawson. Are there any questions from the councillors? Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In your opinion, Mr Dawson, what would happen to this council if it declined to support the budget as it is, as it's coming up in June? What's your forecast that would happen? It's a simple question.
I said tell them staff what to do.
Are you saying if there isn't a freeze and if there isn't a 50% reduction for farmers?
No.
So, but please.
No, correction. I'm just saying if we as a group decline to support the budget, like basically stop supply.
Well, I don't understand the intricacies of Shire management, but if it's like government, then there's no supply. I don't know how you can carry on. But I'm not technically qualified to answer that question. But if it's like a government, if you haven't got supply, you can't carry on.
Would you like to reply to that question, Mr. CEO?
Mr CEO.
I'd have to say that is not a question that I can answer today, but I'm happy to take it on notice and find out the answer, which I think is probably wise, given we are not a constituted level of government as is the state and the federal government. So there will be slight nuances to how that occurs. So I would take that on notice, Councillor Buckley.
Thank you.
May I suggest that we Mr. Eagleson say a few words? Thank you.
Councillor Buckley, we're asking questions from the councillors at this point in time. So Mr CEO has said that he will answer your question on notice.
Excuse me, respectfully, Madam Mayor. I asked you a simple question. Would you mind listening?
It's not the forum for this. This is not the forum.
That's a refusal. Yes. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Peltz.
If I may, towards the staff, what percentage of East Gippsland Shire rates are generated from the farm community as a whole?
Ms Collins.
I've said percentage, thank you.
So, of the total rates and charges, it's just under 10% of the total rates and charges, including our waste and municipal charge.
Ms Bennett, did you have...
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just had a query, point of clarification. In your submission, Mr Dawson, you refer to that farmers' rates be frozen, farmers' frozen rates by 50% net of the state government 20% subsidy. I'm not clear on what that subsidy is you're referring to, so I wondered if you could clarify that.
Made an announcement that they were going to subsidate or contemplating subsidating the farmers' rates by 20%. And if I haven't got that right, I'm sorry. Is that? I would like to know the answer to that myself. I thought that was announced.
officers did undertake some research on that in an effort to clarify it, and we were unable to turn up anything that suggested that was the case.
I have to look at my material, but I will have some material that tells me that they were contemplating a subsidy of, or were considering a subsidy of 20%. Anyway, what I'm suggesting is rates reduced by 50%, either gross or net.
Thank you. Councillor Peltz.
If I may, Madam Mayor, you might enlighten the table with regards to your response from the Minister in charge of our rating area and in charge of local government, and what their response was when you wrote and asked for special consideration for a rate relief for the farmers of our region, please.
We haven't had we've had a response from the Minister for Agriculture, who has not refused rate subsidies, but hasn't committed to anything. So we're unaware as a council. However, we are in frequent communication with her on these matters and continue to advocate for that position. Ms. Treasurer, can you please stop calling out? Councillor Attino, did you have a question?
I'm just wondering, Madam Mayor, if Mr Dawson was referring to the 20% differential that we've suggested.
I will look at my records and find where I got that 20% from. I'd be surprised if I've written something like that without having some evidence that it was either contemplated or whatever. And if I'm wrong, I apologise, but I would just like to say I've written a massive amount of material in 2 or 3 weeks with no assistance from anyone else, and that's not an easy feat. And if I've made a few little mistakes like that, then I apologise.
Councillor White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you to all the presenters, but there has been a theme here that it's pretty much about the farm rates, and what I wouldn't like to see, because I'm a believer in actually freezing the rates against the recommendations of council itself, but I wouldn't like to see the old old ugly raising its head of where we tend to pit residential against farmers. I think we should be considering this as a whole of Shire issue, and please keep that side of it, that part of the argument, out of it, because it does us no good at all. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor White. Councillor Ellis, do you have a question?
Just taken back a bit with that last statement. Perhaps I could ask Ms Bennett, in the numbers of submissions that we've had for this hearing today, did we have anyone to speak on behalf of those less fortunate than us in the community, aged pensioners, people on disability pensions, people who are suffering from some illness or downturn, someone in the retail sector that's struggling? You know, the people who are less fortunate, who don't have a means to meet any rate increase or any of the other concerns that have been raised. Because this issue of dividing the community is very important. And I would like to think that there is someone out there speaking on behalf of these people as well as the farming community.
Was that question directed to Ms Bennett? Councillor Ellis? Ms Bennett? Ms Bennett.
Thank you. The short answer is no, Councillor. The full list of submitters was provided to councillors, and I think with the exception of Mr Nixon, we heard from them all today. But yeah, as I said, short answer is no.
Councillor Peltz.
With regards to the fact that we've been working on these figures since November last year, basically, when we started on the budget, so it's something we have gone over and over and over. In that time, have we had many submissions for consideration of council payments with regards to hardships in the farming sector or in any sector, special payment systems or anything like that put in place, please?
We've had a number of applications for hardship, but none of those have been received from the farming sector.
Are there any further questions? No? I will now ask the Executive Manager Finance to explain the process following the Section 223 committee hearing.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Following the hearing and people speaking to their submissions, the Committee of Council will now convene to discuss and consider all of the 46 submissions that have been lodged in relation to the revised draft budget. And noting that the meeting is, in terms of considering the budget for adoption, is scheduled for Tuesday the 25th of June. So at the end of this process here, yes, Council will convene to discuss. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms Collins. I understand that if there's people who wish to talk to councillors following this hearing, that we will convene to discuss and deliberate, but I will make 5 minutes just to talk to people who have attended, just so that we can hear this, because we've already had the forum for presenting to our submissions. So on that note, thank you for attending, and I now declare the hearing closed at 2:37. Thank you.
Because it's nice to be respected by all.
It is. It really is.
No.
Close